Hello, my friend.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you so much for this opportunity, by the way. Yeah, very excited, a little bit nervous, I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, just yeah, ready to get into it basically.
Yeah, let's do it, dude. And so tell me, what do you go by?
My username is Gigak, but you can call me Gant, which is my real name.
Gaunt or Grant? Grant.
Gant.
Gaunt.
Gant. So it's like Grant, but with the R and the A swapped over, if that makes sense.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
What's the origin of that name?
It's Thai. So that's I'm from Thailand, or at least my parents are from Thailand, but I grew up in England. But yeah, that's my Thai name, and everyone, it's a meme, but everyone always confuses it for Grant, which I'm very very used to.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm happy to call you Garnt.
Gant, yeah, Gant.
Garnt. Okay. And so you're one of the hosts of Trash Taste.
Yes,
So
that's right.
can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so basically a bunch of us. I guess I should start right at the beginning. So first and foremost, I guess I'm like an anime YouTuber. I have been doing YouTube since about 2007,
Oh wow.
and that was mostly talking about anime and reviewing anime. And along the line, like I think like 3 years ago now, a bunch of us moved to Japan, a bunch of anime YouTubers, and we decided to start a podcast together. And we kind of marketed it as an anime podcast, and then we immediately threw an Uno reverse card and was like, actually, we're going to talk about everything but anime a lot of the times. So it kind of
Wow.
just blew up from there. I think we were very lucky. I still don't know what the secret formula is, but a lot of people have known us for Trash Taste, and I'm very thankful for that.
Okay, awesome. So y'all moved to Japan?
Yes, we moved to Japan. We basically got a opportunity from a Japanese company since we all like worked doing anime content on YouTube anyway, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to make content in Japan where anime comes from?" So that would make things a little bit easier. And we'd all been friends for like a few years, and the idea of a podcast had been floated around. But we wanted to do the podcast in person. That was like our big thing.
Hmm.
And we all lived in different places in the world. So as soon as we moved to Japan, that was like, okay, I guess it's time to start the podcast.
Like any weeb's dream.
Yeah, I do. I do get that a lot. And sometimes I look back at myself and I'm like, damn, I never thought I would be in this position when I started my YouTube channel to like, it was like kind of like the weeb cringe dream to like move to Japan and just make content about anime and work with anime companies. But I'm very thankful to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And is there something in particular you wanted to talk about today, or
I mean, I'm I'm like free to just vibe or talk about specific topics. Thankfully I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I don't have too many in-depth things I want to talk about, I think. I guess while we're on the topic of anime though, I guess like one thing that I would love to ask you about is maybe like the relationship between fictional media, which I've always found fascinating because for me personally, like I don't know if this is a normal thing, but I've always found it easier to emotionally attach myself and emotionally invest myself in like a fictional story as opposed to sometimes even more in a fictional story than in real life. So like I've had I guess like real life events that have happened to me that have affected me less than sometimes watching a character go through a similar experience in a fictional story.
and how do you can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a specific example. I think the first time I really noticed this happening was when my grandma passed away. And that was back when I was like 22, 23 or something. And obviously, I was very, very close to my grandma, and I was obviously devastated, very sad that happened. But I remember like being at the funeral, and I didn't feel the emotions that I thought I was going to feel, if that makes sense. It all felt almost dreamlike, like it was happening, but it wasn't really happening. And then like I think like a year or like a few months later, I watched like this anime. It's an anime called Summer Wars, and part of the a big aspect of Summer Wars is there is this grandma there, and they have a very similar family dynamic to the family dynamic I had. And seeing like this is a slight spoiler, but a similar thing happened to the grandma in the story. And when that happened, it like all the emotions I guess I thought I would feel at my grandma's funeral kind of just like hit me all at once. And that's when I like truly got emotional. And I guess I just like wasn't expecting that.
What kind of emotions did you experience watching the anime?
I mean, I cried. That was a big thing that I thought that was a big thing I thought would happen uh at the funeral, at an event like that. But it didn't like the emotions, like the grief and crying and just feeling sad and thankful and all the emotions that I guess I cognitively registered, but I didn't like emotionally. It didn't emotionally hit me until I saw something like that in a fictional piece of work. And I guess yeah, it's kind of like a running trend where I think that's why I love anime so much. I love movies, I love all sorts of media because I can connect with it emotionally much easier as long as it's almost as if there's like not as big of a barrier there for me to like emotionally put myself into it.
Absolutely. So it's a fascinating topic, man.
Mm,
Like there's so much going on. But can I ask just one or two quick questions before I kind
sure.
of? So, do you think that the experience you had watching the anime related to the fact that you lost your grandmother, or do you think
Yeah.
it? Because like you can have all kinds of emotional experiences watching anime. Like, do you think
Yes.
that you basically like? I'm getting this kind of implication that there was a lot of dormant emotion that then like opened up through anime.
Yeah, yeah. I think there were a lot of dormant emotions that I didn't know how to like bring to the surface, or at least it just didn't come natural. Where when I watched the anime, it just feels more natural to bring these emotions up to the surface. Whereas in daily life, in real life, there might be like a few barriers there, and I'm not sure where that comes from or where that came from, but yeah, I find it interesting myself, and I'm not sure if there's a lot of people like me out there, but it's something that I experience at least.
Absolutely. So, how long of a answer do you want?
As long as you want to give, I'm very fascinated and very curious about it.
So I'm kind of curious. Would you say that this happened? Do you think there's a gender specificity here that the emotional numbness in real life and emotional access in anime, based on your experience, do you think there's a gender component to that, or is that basically the same between all genders?
I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but I do think, at least with my gender and my culture, I grew up in, I guess, like a traditional Thai family, and the man had to be seen as like, I guess, not like the strong part of the family, not showing too much emotions. And I guess that might be part of the reason why it was easier for me to show emotions when I'm watching something fictional as opposed to when there's a real life event happening.
Okay. And when you kind of go through your life, what is your like? I know this is kind of a weird question, but like, what is your like emotional experience like on a day-to-day basis?
What is my emotional experience like? Well, I'm always on a journey of self-improvement, so I always try to like I think it's a very important thing to be aware of yourself and take a step back sometimes and think, is there a better way I can approach this? So, in more recent years, I've been trying to let those emotions flow more freely in day-to-day life instead of just in like a safe environment of a fictional world. But right now, I I guess I'm a pretty calm person in like all things considered. I think a lot of it has to do with, so this is going like completely off topic now, but a lot of it has to do with kind of my upbringing, but also I when I was in Thailand, about 23, I became a monk for like about like a month to 6 weeks, and that really helped me, let's say, not train myself, but just be more aware of my internal emotions and my internal thoughts, and help me really reflect. better. So I would say that on a day-to-day basis, I'm a pretty calm, chill person, and if there's something that is emotional, I try to let those emotions like well up a bit more, because I feel like a big problem when I was a kid is that I didn't understand the difference between, uh, let's say, acknowledging that an emotion exists and kind of like dealing with that, as opposed to just pushing it away and just ignoring that there's a negative emotion there.
Wow, that's fascinating, dude. I have so many questions for you.
Oh
Can so tell me a little bit about becoming a monk. Like, how did that happen?
yeah, sure. I mean, it's like whenever I say I became a monk, it's like to me it's a pretty normal thing, because in Thailand, like Buddhism like is fucking massive there, and so a lot of people there are Buddhists, and when we are brought up, so I was brought up in a Buddhist family, so it's normal for the child to become a monk at least twice in their lives. Once when you reach teenagehood, and once when you reach adulthood. And doing that can bring good karma, good blessing to your family, to your parents as well. But I kind of did it for that reason, and also for different reasons. I kind of became a monk. So a lot of the times it's per tradition. So some people just become a monk for 1 day or 2 days or something like that. So in this instance, I decided to become a monk for a pretty long time. It was a month to a 6 week period. I can't remember exactly how long. It's been a very, very long time. And I decided to do it in a point of my life where I felt a little bit lost, and I felt like I needed time to really find out what I truly believed. Because actually, similar to the grandma event, like I had a point where I realized in my early 20s that I didn't know where my beliefs came from. Do I really believe these things because of my own experiences and my own thoughts, or do I believe these things because someone instilled them to me, because my parents taught me that way, or because my culture taught me that way? And so I kind of realized that, fuck, I don't actually know what I believe, what my view on life is. And I kind of needed some time to just reset everything, and get some time to really develop a good foundations within my own beliefs. And being a monk really truly helped that. It made me more confident in myself, and yeah, it was kind of like life changing for me.
Can you help me understand what you kind of learned or discovered, or how you got centered from that experience?
Yeah, sure. So like I feel like for me it was like a very extreme measure, but becoming a monk, you have to let go of all attachments, like for that time you're a monk. So you have to let go of technology, you have to let go of family bonds, all debts, all kind of like baggage, and you have to live the simplest life you can possibly live. That's kind of like the philosophy of the Thai Buddhist monk, where you just get rid of all attachments and you live the simplest life. And by doing that, it just helped get all of like the noise that was surrounding me and was around me, and really allowed me to reflect on pretty much everything, every little decision that I had made in life to get me to that point. And it helped me to really understand what kind of person I want to be, and why I was the person I was at that time.
Can you give me an example of what kind of noise you had in your life at that time?
I mean, anything could be like anything could be noise, whether it be societal pressure to like get a job, or you know family drama, or some kind of like drama going on in my own life with relationships. And there was a lot of worries, and I went through a pretty traumatic experience just before that as well. And so there was just a lot of emotions that stopped me from really taking the time to really focus purely on myself, and focus purely on nothing else, and just living the simple life, and figuring out what kind of person I am.
And what did you figure out about the kind of person you are?
What? That's a very loaded question. Um, I figured out that, a big thing at that time was I would kind of like try to do anything to please another person. I would go out my way just to seem like, just to be liked or come off in a positive manner to another person. And I realized that a lot of the negative relationships I had in my life at that point stemmed from the need of, I guess, like positive affirmation for someone that maybe didn't really matter as much as I thought they did in my mind. And it really helped me shape the relationships and the people that I surround myself going forward into the future. I'm very blessed now because I think I have a lot of very close friends, a lot of friends that I cherish dearly. And I remember growing up, my mom was like, "You'll make the friends of your life in university, the ones that will stick with you to the end." And that just didn't happen. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And then I just realized I was kind of like going about it the wrong way. I guess that's like one of the things I figured out that
Wow.
I kind of like put into my life philosophy going forward.
And so how did that shape your relationships going forward?
How did that shape my relationship going forward? I would say it gave me more confidence. More confidence just to, how can I word this? Uh, it gave me more confidence in. I know this is going to sound cliche, but it made me more confidence in just being myself, and instead of trying to warp myself to become someone another person would like, I would try to find people that liked me for me, as opposed to kind of like reforming myself in different social interactions to come off positive to the other person.
Sure. So it sounds like you used to chase people's acceptance.
Yes, yeah, acceptance was the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, and it sounds like you really just started being comfortable with kind of who you are and
Yeah,
acknowledging that people may not accept you, but that's actually okay.
yeah, exactly. I guess I figured out that like it was not worthwhile to pursue connections and relationships if I didn't feel comfortable just being fully myself around people. And over time, that would only put strain on the relationship because subconsciously I would not really want to sustain the relationship, and I was only doing so for some kind of like acceptance and affirmation, and that was the wrong way to approach it.
So Garnt, oftentimes when people are in those situations, they kind of one of the reasons they can sort of almost become dependent on the acceptance of others is if like they're afraid of like loneliness, right? So if you kind of think
Yeah,
about, okay, if I don't behave this way,
yeah,
then this person like won't hang out with me anymore.
yeah,
And is that so? It sounds like that resonates with you.
yes,
So
that
so
does.
how do you think it is that you because like essentially in order to free yourself of
Hmm.
needing the acceptance of others, you have to be like okay with the consequences of them leaving you, right?
Yes.
How did you get to be okay with that? Because I think it's that needing another person that really keeps people stuck.
Yeah, it's basically so, this basically again like came down to like during like my monk period where it's almost like I could trace the future of this relationship and how I would emotionally be emotionally impacted from that. So, I use this technique a lot in my life where there's a lot of things in life where you look for instant gratification, like that, like the acceptance of another person. But there's a lot of other things where there's that instant gratification where in the short term it might not be the best decision for you, but how I countered that was I accepted that I understood that in the short term, gaining acceptance from another person felt good. It felt good, but then I would trace that, I guess, myself to the future, and just imagine the situations going forward, and me just not being happy and realizing that it would never fill that loneliness gap that I was searching to fill, and instead just make the loneliness even more expanded, just because it would make the loneliness even more expanded, uh, just because I was faking like myself to be someone else, so I wouldn't really feel like I'd found someone who I had a connection with. And it was like imagining the long-term effects of that made me realize that in the short term, that is not the way to fix your life. And I always look for, long-term solutions and long-term things in pretty much every aspect of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating how often we trade feeling good for being unhappy.
Yeah.
Right? That's a trade we make so much.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I think it's just really hard to kind of play that tape through to the end and really realize that in a paradoxical way, when I look for someone's acceptance and they accept me and I feel good, it's weird because we don't think about that as like the coin that we pay for that as our own unhappiness.
Yeah.
And it's really challenging.
Yeah.
But because we tend to think that feeling good and accepting the acceptance of others will make us happy, where I think what you sort of said, it makes a lot of sense, where what it really does to you is makes you more alone, because then you're not being accepted for who you are. And so, then you kind of have to keep up this act and you feel like you have all these shoes to fill. And then like, even though you've bought your space in this relationship for today, you're going to have to pay with more unhappiness tomorrow.
Yeah. I think like a good way, like I guess the way I imagined it, but I'm like kind of remembering like the literal visual image that I had when sometimes like I was meditating and stuff like that. It always felt like, before I became a monk, like whenever I'd go out, whenever I'd socialize, there would be like a mask on me, and sometimes it would be like several layers of masks, and it would get like heavier and heavier, and like I kind of just like imagined just like taking like the mask off, and just you're naked, you're vulnerable, but if you find someone that accepts you without wearing any masks, that was the kind of connection that I wanted, and I realized and I searched for. And yeah, that was one of the aspects that I kind of like realized afterwards. I was like, okay, let's start off with a clean slate. And for a time I definitely did feel lonely, but in the long term, I look at myself now, and I couldn't be more grateful for the people around me. I feel like every friend I have is a friend that I would show up anytime. I would do anything for. So I'm very grateful for that.
Wow. How do you find friends like that, bro?
How do I find friends like that? A lot of, not really trial and error, but just putting yourself out there. Especially when you don't have a lot of close friends, you kind of like get desperate to cling on to any connection you have. And I'm like a pretty heavy introvert. I've always been a pretty heavy introvert. But I wasn't exactly happy being lonely, not having a lot of friends. So what I did was kind of just like trial by fire, try to go to as many events and talk to as many people as possible. Just keep in mind that not everyone I talk to I'm going to vibe with or have a close friendship with. And eventually, if you put yourself out there enough, friendships will just form naturally. It will take time. It will take effort. It's not an easy or fast process, like we talked about the instant gratification. But in the long term, it will happen naturally, and you'll have a strong foundation of friendships and connections to build off of.
Wow. Sounds like it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, I mean, to me it took a lot of effort, just because, like I said, I was a really heavy introvert. I remember growing up, I basically never went out and kind of like never socialized, never went out to socialize with other people. I just kind of made the assumption that people will come to me eventually in life, and the realization that that just doesn't happen, and I have to make an active effort to pursue pursue this pursue relationships, pursue friendships, was like a big switch for me.
So going back to kind of your original question, you said you were asking about like emotional connection to anime. Why do you think it's easier for you to emotionally connect to anime?
I think just because, to me, it feels like a safe space. You know, to me, when you're watching a fictional piece of work, because it's fictional, it feels like there won't be any judgments or anything like that. Maybe, you know, like I said, I grew up in a culture where showing emotions was like not like kind of like frowned upon, maybe not frowned upon, but definitely not openly accepted as much as it is today. So I guess like fiction and anime in particular just became like my safe haven, just to be like, hey, this is the place where you can show emotions, you can feel emotions, and you don't have to feel guilty or worry about judgment from it.
Why not? What makes that safe?
Because it's not real, right? It's fiction. And it sounds counterintuitive, but because it's not real, you can to me it felt more real than a lot of real life events. So it's a weird counterintuitive way that my emotions worked.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Can I one thing, Garnet, you seem to be going in and out of focus a little bit. I'm not quite sure why, but now you're in focus.
Okay, sorry.
But for some reason, it seems to. No, it's okay.
Okay.
For some reason, sometimes we'll focus on the door behind you. But so, kind of going back to this, what makes it unsafe to feel emotions in the real world? Like,
I guess I had like this subconscious fear of being judged for burying myself out there.
Okay.
I think that was, yeah, I think that's the big thing, if I had to put it into words.
Yeah. So subconscious fear, but it also sounds like conditioning, right? So you were,
Yeah,
it sounds like
and
growing up, you were very actively taught not to express emotion.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember what it was like when you cried growing up? Like, do you remember crying?
I'll be honest, I don't remember crying at all before the age of like 20. Obviously, like, as a baby and stuff like that, but I genuinely don't remember crying at all. And the first time I remember crying was what I told you about. And I was like, oh, I can actually do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's fascinating. But first of all, this is a pattern that I see a lot where people feel very emotionally connected to anime. I've even worked with some people who I would almost say are like addicted to anime-induced emotion.
Yeah.
Where like they feel numb in the rest of their life. And one of the reasons that they kind of get quote unquote addicted to anime is like the time and space where they actually get to feel. They actually feel alive and connected to these like stories and narratives. And I think there's a lot of different pieces to that. The first is that if you look at anime has larger than life emotional evoking experiences, right? So like the colors are super bright. The crying that happens in anime is like really anguished, right? And like it's very, very, there's music involved. There's like a lot of kind of like building up to stuff. So if you sort of think about the medium itself, it is very, very high octane emotion.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a group of people out there who are kind of emotionally expressed. The reason that I asked you about a gender component is because there's good evidence that especially men are emotionally like conditioned to be numb. So there's something called normative male alexithymia. So alexithymia is essentially like emotional color blindness. So, and this is true of a lot of women too. A lot of women can be alexithymic, but I think from a cultural perspective, men are more often taught to be like emotionally suppressed.
Yeah.
And so when you have a certain amount of suppression, right? Your grandmother passed away, and you almost described like a kind of like a depersonalizing experience, which is actually a trauma response of like, it kind of feels like a dream, like you feel really numb. So what's going on in your brain when you feel numb? Your brain is actually actively suppressing all emotions. So there's some like circuit on high that is saying, no, 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 no emotions. Right. And because you've been conditioned to, you know, you shouldn't cry and all this other kind of stuff. And so then what happens is you've got these like emotionally numb men, it could be women too, anyone who's kind of alexithymic, who then has this medium which gives you, like you said, kind of a safe space, right? So first of all, when you were crying, like were you by yourself?
Yeah, I was by myself.
Right? So that's like the first thing is why does anime make it safe for us to feel emotion? My money would be that if you were like at an anime convention and watching this same thing with like hundreds of people, there would be a lot more emotional suppression going on.
Yeah.
And so the safety of it is that you can have this emotional experience kind of like on your own with no one watching. I think it's very, very emotionally evoking. So your brain is toning down all the emotion, and the anime on the flip side is like ramping it up a lot, which is why I think a lot of people will get emotional release through anime, because you need that almost that like high octane kind of emotional like climax or catharsis or whatever to really feel. And then I think there's another component, which is just that human beings, a lot of the emotions that we experience are through like narrative. And for the same reason that we have for thousands of years, human beings have been telling stories, right? And like, what's the reason for that? It's because those stories like will connect with us on an emotional level. Whether this is kind of like, and anime is full of this stuff, right? All these archetypes and tropes like hero's journey. And I mean, you've got a lot of that shit in your life where like, you know, going monk mode and discovering yourself. And then like this kind of weird like redemption arc where, you know, you were inducted to some secret kenjutsu or whatever, like when you were a monk, and then you lived the anime dream, right? Someone could make an anime about your life.
Oh no. It is not that interesting.
I see you've got a ring on your finger, so I'm curious if you found a relationship that is romantic and fulfilling.
Oh yes, I got married last year, and yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm talking about now, I am so like I couldn't have found a more perfect partner in the world, and I believe a big part of it is something important to me in a relationship is balance and teaching each other something and balancing each other out. So my partner is like maybe on the surface like pretty much the complete opposite of me. She you know, she's someone who is not afraid to let her emotions well up and kind of like is not afraid to go with her gut feeling a lot of the times and gut instincts. And I was always been someone who's been very calm and very calculated. But she's taught me so much about managing emotions, letting it be okay to show emotions, to get emotions out. I mean, the first time I ever cried in front of someone else was I think in front of her. It's interesting you mentioned that before, just because I remember so many instances in public where something emotional would happen and like my eyes would start watering up, and it would get to a point, and I would get emotional, and then suddenly it's like just on the cusp of crying, something would like flick in my brain, and then my body would just be like, nope, this isn't happening now. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm like reset back to zero now.
Yeah. So if you kind of look at that, right? So what's happening is you're getting some kind of like, probably I would say cortical response, maybe not cortical actually, but you're getting some kind of response that shuts down the emotion. And I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but the greater the flood of tears that is imminent, the stronger that response has to be, which is paradoxically why like at funerals, right? So like there's a huge flood of tears coming, and so you're going to even like disconnect even harder to the point where you're even in kind of this dreamlike state. And then I think what happens is all those tears are stored up, and then when you watch an anime, you're kind of like, there's so much emotion packed in there that it just opens the floodgates. Because then the other thing is you're by yourself. I think that's like, we were talking about this, you know, what's safe about it? What's safe about it is if you sort of think about it, having most emotionally connective experiences require other human beings. But the whole point is that if you're like emotionally, if you're like an emotional fortress and you don't want to be vulnerable and you want to be protected, like you can't, it's hard to evoke that emotion. And that's where I think anime comes in, because there's a bunch of emotion and you can kind of do it in the safety of your own home. So you can like sit there and like you can bawl, and like you're kind of like, even then I would imagine at the very beginning you don't want to bawl, right? You feel that shut off switch kind of turning on, but then you kind of let it not shut off. You kind of hold it at bay, and then it starts coming out and it starts to feel really good, and then you check the door to make sure no one's gonna like walk in on you, and you know.
And I remember like kind of realizing like later in life, I think like how important that is for me, because by having like this emotional shut off, I think I went through a lot of my life where I just felt disconnected. You know, I just, sometimes you felt disconnected from people, or just disconnected from the stuff happening around you. And I feel like being more emotionally aware has helped me really become a better person. If like, you know, I feel like I've become a much better person, a much more balanced person because of it. And yeah, a lot of this has, you know, been my wife kind of like showing me, not really showing me, but helping me to understand that it's okay, and helping me to get comfortable with it. And you know, I couldn't be more grateful for my wife for that.
It sounds like an amazing, it's a woman?
Yes, woman.
It sounds like she's an amazing woman.
Oh yes. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I truly believe that, you know, I'm not sure if I believe in soulmates, but I believe a soulmate isn't someone who is perfect for you right as you meet. But I believe what's truly special and truly important is finding someone who you are willing to change yourself to become a better person for that person, and that person reciprocates that by doing it for you.
Some real anime level shit right here.
Is this? I just this is just like, I mean, you know, this is just how I envisioned how to have a happy life. I think like the end goal of everything, I think the end goal of all of this, I just want to be fucking happy, man. Like I just want to be happy with myself and my life around me. And yeah, I'm just constantly on a journey to be the happiest person I can be. And why? Life is just better if you're happy. Life is better if you're happy, and you know, your life experience will always change, your life situation will always change. But if you're happy, the world's just brighter, and you feel good just being alive and existing, I guess.
Yeah, dude, this is I think you've really internalized a lot of anime, because a lot of what you're saying I can absolutely see as like parts of, you know, there's some after the climax, you have a couple people that are like sitting on a park bench and musing about life and being happy, and and
I mean, I think a lot of this does also come down to a lot of like my Buddhist upbringing as well. A lot of it is kind of like finding, like a lot of Buddhism, especially the ones I taught, is about finding internal peace and internal happiness. And a lot of the teachings that we have in the way of life kind of like try to guide you in that direction. So I guess maybe seeing like a lot of these morals that, you know, you say you talk about anime, a lot of these morals that are seen in anime kind of like resonated with me very, very deeply, just because that was already internalized about how you should live life, and what kind of person you should aim to be anyway.
And can you tell me a little bit about that? Like what kinds of, you know, where does happiness come from? How do you seek it?
Oh, that is a loaded question that I do not have the answer for. But
What is a loaded question?
a loaded question is something that maybe I haven't thought too deeply about, and could possibly branch off into about 10 different things depending on how my mind works at that time. But I mean, what is happiness to me? happiness is finding self-fulfillment, and I don't know if gratification is the right word. It's a struggle to find like the right words to describe what it is. But to me, if if I can't find the exact right word to describe it, the feeling I get is just feeling like your soul is full, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like that's kind of like the feeling that I get when I think happiness and fulfillment.
It's interesting. Are you familiar with this term dukkha? Or
I'm not,
dukh?
no.
Okay, so I'm not sure what language your Buddhist tradition is in. I imagine
Right.
it's Thai.
Yes, Thai, yes.
And so do you, is there a word for like the basic, like when the Buddha was talking about like what's suffering, like what word do y'all use for that?
Um, so I'm not sure because a lot of Buddhism is like in Sanskrit and Pali, which I've never really understood.
Okay.
The closest thing to like what I was talking about is like a Thai concept called Jai, which is like the heart. And I think a lot of Thai culture revolves around the concept of Jai. It's like the heart. So for example, like when we refer to something that's, if you're impatient, it's Jailan, which literally just means hot heart. So a lot of my internalizations about how I deal with emotions, I guess, like internally comes from how I view the heart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So it's sort
Yeah.
of like depending on the state of the heart,
Yes. Yes.
different fluctuations of the heart will result in impatience or fear or
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So I mean, you're talking about kind of fulfillment.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because if you look at the Sanskrit word for suffering, it's dukkha. And
Right.
literally what dukkha translates to is empty space.
Right.
So it's like I kind of think about suffering as anything, it's the gap. It's the gap. So if you
Right.
kind of think about, oh, I heard this anime was really epic. And so then I sit down to watch it and I'm like, it's like pretty good, but it's not as epic as everyone is saying.
Yeah.
So if you sort of think about in that moment, there's discontent, right? You're like, I'm a little bit disappointed. So what is that disappointment? It's the gap between your expectations and your experience. And if you
Right.
really look at like what is the source of any unhappiness, you'll always find a gap. And when I hear you kind of talk about fulfillment, what does it mean to be fulfilled? It means that there's an absence of a gap. There's no gap. It's full.
Right.
So
Yeah.
whether it's a romantic relationship or whatever, like the relationship, even though it isn't perfect and there are problems, there's no gap. Does that kind
Yeah.
of make sense?
Yeah. That makes total sense. I it's funny because the way you just described it is basically how I envision it in my mind as well. Sometimes I feel like there is a gap in my life, and gaps. Even if you can be completely fulfilled at one point in your life, that doesn't mean that as you grow older, you get more life experience, that a new gap is going to appear somewhere. So I believe that my life has been a journey to try and fill in those gaps as best as I can to be fulfilled and be happy. So I think you actually hit the nail on the head on that.
Yeah. How does it feel to continuously fill gaps?
I mean, it's it takes effort. I wouldn't say it's tiring, but it takes effort. It takes a constant it takes constant energy. But I believe the feeling you get when you are able to fill in one of those gaps, that's kind of like, that's always the high that I always chase in life. And I will continue chasing for the rest of my life, I think.
Well, I would hope not.
What do you mean?
Well, so earlier you were talking about like, self-improvement is really important to you.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's kind of interesting because like what you're sort of describing is that, yeah, there's like a constant gap that you're trying to fill.
Yeah.
So even if
Yeah.
you kind of go like a level meta, there's a gap of unfulfilled gaps. Does that kind of make
Right.
sense? Like you're always
Yeah.
like, and then like you feel good, right? When you fill in the gap, you feel
Yeah.
good. But as you
Yeah.
said, it's temporary. And then
Yeah.
it requires like more effort to fill the next gap and more effort to fill the next gap and more effort. I'm not saying that it
Yeah.
increases with each one, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
always requiring. And so if you kind of think about it, there's like a level of a hunger,
Hmm.
which I don't know if you actually have or not, but that's a kind of like one level, like you're discontent with having a gap to begin with.
Yeah. That's interesting that you say, because I guess I'm like, this conversation is helping me find out a lot about myself as well. Um, I've
Sometimes what
never
we do
been,
here.
yeah, I've never been the type of person who has felt comfortable sitting still, you know. I don't know what it is, but I always like to be working towards something. I guess that's what drives me. And I guess part of that drive, I mean, I like the way you word it now. I think having that drive to do something is, you know, filling in a gap for myself. I feel good working towards something, and if I'm in a point in life where nothing seems to be happening, then I actually feel unfulfilled. I actually feel like I don't really have a purpose or something I'm working towards. So I think, yeah, subconsciously I'm always trying to work towards something, doing something new.
Yeah. And how does it feel to be constantly improving?
I like it. I like it. I
I can
like,
see that.
yeah, you know, I like being on a journey. Don't think that I don't think a perfect person exists in this world, but I believe striving towards perfection can only make you a better person. And I'm not saying like perfection, like as a concept that, you know, I have to be the I'm not like a perfectionist to be like I have to be the perfect person, and anything less, I am unsatisfied with. But having having something you work towards is to me something that gives me fulfillment and happiness as well, and
Yeah.
purpose in a lot of
I,
ways.
I think there's a really subtle. So sometimes when I hear that people are like constantly into self-improvement,
Hmm.
there are kind of two shades of people who are into self-improvement. One is it
Right.
almost can feel like an addiction where I need to be better, I need to be better, I need to be better.
Yeah.
And if you kind of look at like the addiction to self-improvement, it can come from a fundamental lack of acceptance with yourself.
Right.
Like, I'm not good enough, and if I get better, I will then be good enough.
Yeah.
But since that feeling comes from you, it doesn't actually come from any external thing. No amount of accomplishment makes the feeling go away because it's not
Yeah.
really coming from the lack of external accomplishment. It's coming from you. But I don't see that in you. What I actually see in you is something that's very different, even though it looks very similar, which is that it sounds like devotion to the process of improvement
Yeah.
is what really helps you feel fulfilled. And I
Yeah.
would even venture that failure doesn't feel like a setback for you.
No.
And there's a huge difference because in one, I see you're about to say something, so I'll be quiet in a second. But in
No.
one case, you know, people, whether they feel good or not, really depends on whether they accomplish the thing. Whereas on the flip side, being devoted to self improvement is sort of like an action as opposed to a goal, I think is what really can lead to a lot of contentment. And oftentimes people get the two confused because they look very similar because both people are devoted to self improvement. The big
Yeah.
difference is for one person, their feeling of contentment depends on the improvement itself. Whereas for the other person, they're actually free from the actual improvement. And it's kind of the devotion to the attempt that their happiness comes from.
Yeah. I honestly, I think I was gonna say something, and you pretty much said everything I wanted to say. Yeah. I mean, I, I don't want to be a better person because it's like, you know, like a constant goal. I just I feel like if I lose that drive, and if I forget what a good person is, or you know, if I ever forget that, then that's a slope to like, how can I say, it's like fall back down the hill. And uh so I've completely lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
um um what I'm trying to say is I'm always trying to be self-aware of myself, right? I always try to take a step back and reflect on myself as a person. And I think doing that is a healthy process, just to just to make sure that one, you think that you're on the right path, and two, to kind of like figure out if you're really happy. I think self-reflection is very important because unless I met some people who always live in the moment and never look back. And I think if you never look back, then you can never tell how far you've come. And I think that's I think that's a very important aspect of anyone who's on a life journey.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, they're really heavy anime tropes, bro.
Is it?
Yeah, it's great. I think this is part of the reason that anime is so resonant with people, right? Because I think it mirrors our experience of life. But I mean, I think you're talking about a journey and really being able to look back and see how far you've come and being kind of content with the bumps along the way.
Yeah. While we're on this topic, though, I was curious because I guess like while we're talking on the topic of like holes in your life and things that maybe you're not like completely fulfilled with, one thing I've always battled with is the concept of like a home, right? Because I, as someone who has Thai parents, born and raised in England, like throughout a lot of my life, I've always had a lot of people talk about, going home, or this place feels like home. And I guess like I'm reaching the point now in my life where I'm just like, I should probably try to think about settling down somewhere, because I've lived in England, I've lived in like Japan, Thailand, China for a bit as well. And I think a lot of that was subconsciously me trying to find a place that I felt like I belonged. Because it's like weird because it's not like I don't like I'm uncomfortable in somewhere like England or Thailand, for example. But for example, when I go back to Thailand, I love it. It feels like I have family there. It feels so good. I almost feel at home, but I feel like because I grew up abroad, like when I speak Thai, I have like a slight British accent when I speak Thai, so people can tell I grew up abroad. I will never fully be viewed as like someone Thai. And growing up in England as well, I grew up in Brighton, which is now a very progressive city. But when I was growing up, there weren't very many Asian immigrant kids surrounding me. So I definitely felt out of place in England as well. And I think subconsciously I've always been searching for a place where I felt comfortable. But I still to this day, I'm still trying to find a place where I can truly call my home, and I will be happy settling down at. Sorry.
Is there a question there?
Yeah. I guess the question is this a normal feeling to have? Is this something I should really be kind of like trying to fill this gap in my life, or am I just looking at it the wrong way, do you think?
Yes to all of the above.
Okay.
So I mean, I have an answer for you. It's one that I feel 100% confident about, and is probably the most wrong thing I'm going to say over the course of this conversation.
Okay.
So I think the first thing to understand is that, is it a normal feeling? It is for you. I mean, your karma is very unique. Like, you were not born to have a home. You were born to find a home.
Right.
So like, I think this is should you pursue it? 100%. And I think you're going to find your home, but I don't think that you're going to, I think like that, like finding your home is part of your journey for you, especially. Right. So you're like an expat, grew up. So Thailand's not your home. Japan isn't, Britain, it sounds like Brighton isn't your home.
Yeah.
And so I think that you should absolutely find a home, because that's the gap that you feel, right? Like you want it. But I don't think that this is the tricky thing. I think, are you thinking about you're wrong? I think you are, in the sense that I don't know how much of finding a home is like doing internal work or improving. I think it's just circumstance. So you're also like a nomad, like your karma is nomadic.
Right.
And I think you're going to keep on nomading around until you find your home, and you'll know when you get there. Okay. And it could be Japan. How do you feel about Japan?
I mean, I love Japan. you know, it's very, very amazing country to live in. I love the culture there. Um, it's definitely not a place that I think I could call home in the long term. It's, you know, it's this feeling in Japan where I'm, I think like I'm accepted, but it's not where I belong, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's, and I want to find somewhere where I belong. That's kind of like what, you know, the nomad kind of life of like what I've been searching for, where a lot of these places I am accepted, but there's something in me where I feel like I don't truly belong there. And yeah, it's it's kind of like it's I don't know if like I'm being too picky because you know there are aspects I love in everywhere I've lived where I love one aspect, but there's other aspects where you know I don't really like for example in England I love all my friends there. I feel you know culturally I feel I vibe with England a lot, and a lot of my closest friends are in England. uh I just I just never felt like I truly belonged in England personally. I much prefer the kind of like the climate and the way of thinking of Thailand, and I definitely do feel at home there in a lot of aspects. Uh, but you know, like I said, even though I am Thai, uh, I, a lot of my interactions in Thailand have had that like I guess slight barrier just because they acknowledge me as Thai, but they don't truly see me as like someone Thai there.
Yeah. So,
Um, yeah, and you know, very similar in Japan as well.
so I mean,
So
is home a place?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I think maybe home. I've been grappling with that question a lot. Is home a place or is home like a feeling? Because this is gonna sound like super cheesy, but like the closest thing I have a feeling to like a home now, um, is like when I feel like I'm at home. Is it doesn't really matter where it is, but say I've traveled home and every time I went on a journey, my mom would always cook me the same meal just to be like, "Hey, welcome back. Here's mom's cooking again." And like the feeling I get was just like every time I take like that first bite or like I smell her cooking when she's just like when I open the door and I come home for the first time, I see family for the first time in years or months or years sometimes. That's like the feeling I get when I truly realize, oh, okay, I'm home now. This is a good feeling. And I guess yeah, that's kind of like the feeling I am searching for that, you know, is not, let's say, that is more internal and not dependent on, you know, seeing family and things like that. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm confused. You're saying it doesn't depend on seeing family? Because when you describe home to me, it sounds like you're talking about family.
yeah, I guess so. I guess family is a very important thing to me. Um, so yeah, I guess family is a massive thing to me in terms of having a home. Could I live with my family? That's
No, I know.
that's a different question. But yeah,
So my Japanese is rusty, but tadaima, right?
Tadaima, yes.
And so that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I think there are a couple things at play here. The first is that literally it sounds like you're looking for home in the wrong place, in the
right.
sense that you're looking for it in a place. I don't know that it's in a place, especially when I hear you talk. I mean, it
Yeah,
sounds like home to you is a particular meal or things like that. And when you say you don't know if you can live with it, you don't even live with your family. Like you
Yeah,
got a new one coming, right? So
right.
you get to craft your own. And I
Yeah,
suspect that 5 to 10 years from now, like I think you're sort of like in I think you're totally fine, but I also think you're kind of like looking in the wrong places where
right,
you're like, okay, I don't feel at home in Thailand. So that's your answer, right? It doesn't mean that you need to make yourself fit in Thailand or you need to
right.
make yourself fit in Britain or you need to
Yeah,
make yourself fit in Japan. If none of those things feel right to you, that's not your home.
right.
And so what's going to happen over time is you're going to keep looking in different places, and one of two things happens when people don't find a home. They keep
Right.
looking everywhere until they find their home, which sometimes happens. Like place number 3, place number 4. You look like you're about to
Right.
say something. Go for it. I won't
Oh, no,
stop
no,
you.
no. I was just
Okay.
burping. Sorry.
And so either you'll find it, like maybe it'll be the States or, some other location or whatever. And then the
Right.
other option is that, what's going to happen is you're going to like be looking for it, looking for it, looking for it. You're going to do your podcast, whatever. You're going to come home one day and your wife is going to be there and y'all are going to hang out or something like that. And then it's going to feel like home. But
Right.
I don't know that you need to go looking for personal improvement, which is, I'm afraid, something that you may be doing. Like, oh, like I need to like allow this to be my home, right? Like I need to like become a
Right,
better
right,
human
right.
being and accept. No, like that's, no. And then it's not a place and it's not personal improvement. It's something that you're going to grow into. Like, I don't
Right.
know if you're thinking about having kids, but if you like have kids and stuff, like,
Yeah,
you,
I
you kind
mean,
of work your way into home.
I think a lot of the reason a lot of these questions has been cropping up is because I didn't really put much thought into it. And then, I'm 33 now, and the idea of kids is something that, we've definitely been playing around with. Not too soon, but something that we have been aware of. And that's kind of like, I guess, where a lot of this like anxiety comes from, to be like, oh shit, like I need to like, it's fine living the nomad life now when I'm a YouTuber and I have all this freedom and stuff. But when I have responsibilities, when I have a kid, I'm like, okay, I want a stable life for my kid. So it's kind of like trying to find that balance that I would be happy raising a family in.
Yeah. So I think, my experience, and I've worked with a lot of people who have kids. I don't know how else to say
Right.
that. But I think that a lot of times before you have kids and before you have a home, you're like looking for stuff, but it's kind of, you're trying to figure this out with like a blindfold. Like I think a big experience of life is that your kids will carve out the home for you. So like a lot of times, especially when it comes to kids, like we think that we have to set everything up before the kid comes along. But I mean,
Right.
the kid is going to screw everything up anyway. Like there's just
Yeah.
no way that you can adequately prepare to be a parent. You just can't do it.
Right.
In my opinion anyway. But the good news is that you don't have to. And
Right.
that like, I have a feeling, hopefully, that you'll carve out your home. It's not something that you're going to find preformed. Not you, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Your family it's not your existing family. You're going to carve out this new family. You're going to carve out, if you decide to have kids, it'll be a place. It'll start to grow on you over time and you'll settle down. You'll have roots. Because right now,
Right.
what I'm hearing is that you're looking for a perfect place. Like, oh, this is the problem in Thailand. A home isn't perfect. It's,
Yeah.
there's lots of problems with it, as you'll discover.
Okay.
And then that's just the thing, though, is that it's the place that you accept in spite of its flaws. Whereas a lot of times when we're looking for a home, we're looking for that place where that feels right.
Okay.
And it feels right because you break it in. It's like a pair of shoes.
Right.
Like you wear them a couple times and then they feel right.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, I never expected to talk about any of this coming on, if I'm being honest. This is just something that just like kind of like came to me as we were talking about
Great.
all the previous things that we were, mentioning before. I can't remember. Yeah, I can't even remember how this conversation started at the beginning.
Well, we started
Yeah, I
off-
mean,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
oh no, I
I was just curious. I mean, so you had asked me this question about like emotions and anime, and I mean,
Yeah.
if you've got other questions like that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, let me think, because like I don't have any like concrete questions now because I tried to think about what I really wanted to talk about on this podcast, or I don't know if this is even a podcast or just us.
I don't know
like,
either.
shooting the shit. This has evolved into something that I definitely wasn't expecting, but I've been very, very grateful about. Yeah, I mean, like right now I'm just like happy to be happy in life. We talked about being fulfilled. I honestly like took this opportunity I think a big thing is help to understand myself better. I remember you said about before, like 3 conversations ago, about guys being conditioned to not show emotions. And Something about that really like resonated with me because with like this new friend group that we, with like this new friend group that you know I've happily built up over the years. I think we had like just like a casual hangout 2 years ago, and the topic of therapy just like came up, and you know every guy in this group suddenly just like raised their hand to be like, yeah, I've gotten therapy before as well, and I've been friends with these guys for years, and we had just never talked about this. And I remember telling them, like, guys, we've known each other for how many years, and we're just bringing this up now. What the hell? How did this happen? Um, and like, I'm wondering, do you think it's like, is it a cultural thing, or is it something that is embedded in all cultures, or is it purely something that's hardwired into us?
Or is what is the it?
The feeling of like us having to like close up on our emotions.
That's a great question. So I think there are a couple of different answers.
Right.
The first is that there's absolutely a conditioning component. So
Right.
for whatever reason, and this isn't, is it more true of men on average? Sure. But I think that there are plenty of women or non-binary people who grow up in circumstances where they too are taught not to display emotion. I think it looks a little bit different. So, for
Right.
example, a lot of the women that I work with are taught to equally, or they're sort of taught that there's certain like safe emotions that you can
Right.
display, but you fucking better not display any of the unsafe emotions, right?
Yeah.
So like you can't demonstrate discontent or disrespect for authority or frustration, or like, you're allowed to cry if you're a girl, like in some circumstances, but like you're not allowed to get upset. So I see
Yeah.
this a lot with women that I work with that are in kind of high powered careers where like getting angry is like, oh, this person is a bitch and all this kind of stuff. So it's slightly different, but there's absolutely a conditioning component.
Right.
Second thing is that I think that somewhere along the way, now this is where things get weird, but I've started to realize recently that there are a lot of biases in the way that we deal with emotions. And I think a lot of those biases are really rooted in our... So, for example, a lot of what we talk about in terms of dealing with your emotions is talking about your emotions, right? So there's this assumption that verbalizing emotions is processing them. But that I've really been looking into a lot of really interesting research about the origins of psychotherapy and realized that there's actually like a pretty big bias in psychotherapy that is towards women, probably. I'm not 100% sure about this, but if you look at studies, for example, like men are reluctant to engage in couples therapy. And why is that? If you ask men, it's because they feel like they're disadvantaged. And so if you kind of talk to them, you're like, well, what do you mean you're disadvantaged? Well, like when I go into therapy, my significant other, assuming a heteronormative kind of perspective, like knows how to talk to the therapist and like articulate their emotions. And I don't know how to do that. So we go into this therapy session. My partner is like talking about their emotions in a way that like the therapist resonates with them. They're like, oh, wow, you're doing really good. Like their partner's doing a good job. And I don't know how to say that. Like, I don't know how to articulate it. And so I kind of feel like I'm at a disadvantage. I feel like the bad guy in therapy because I can't articulate my feelings. And instead, like, does that kind of make sense? So there's lots of research that shows that men feel uncomfortable in therapy. Men are less likely to engage in therapy. And so then the question is why? So it could be because of the way that we're conditioned, but I think a bigger part that we haven't really touched on, which I'm suspecting and some light evidence for, is that if you look at the origins of psychotherapy, they were really, like Freud is like a big part of that. And I think a lot of times when we were developing the field of psychiatry, we were trying to figure out, okay, how do emotions work? And we went and we talked to a lot of humans. And then what happens is based on the humans that we talked to, we determined that, okay, this is how you deal with emotions. The problem is that the humans that we talked to weren't a representative sample. So if you look at the majority of people who engage in psychotherapy, it's actually like 60 to 70% women. Even, I'm not sure about this. I've been trying to find statistics on this, but I think the majority of Freud's clients or patients, I think were women, but I could be wrong about that. And so what happens is when we're originally developing our idea of, okay, how do we deal with emotions? This is the science of dealing with emotions. But there could be some kind of intrinsic bias that men didn't really participate in the early studies. They weren't the majority of patients. So when we concluded this is how you deal with emotions, we were actually looking at a population of 60 to 70% women.
Right.
Or even if it wasn't 60 to 70% women, the men that we're talking about in like old Austria or wherever Freud was may have been a subset of men that were responsive to like Freud's methodologies, which were highly verbal in nature.
Right.
But I think a big part of this is that there's this assumption that articulation or using verbal stuff to manage emotions is how you do it. Whereas I would sometimes wonder, having worked with a lot of men and women, whether that's actually how we do it. So with dudes, like we're more physical, right? And that could be conditioning. Who knows? Maybe it's genetic. You know, I recently like took part in something called like an anger ceremony, which is like a bunch of dudes like went out into the wilderness and then like we split up and we walked off into the woods.
Right.
And then you like scream or you just let your emotions out in privacy. And then you come back and you all cry and you hug it out and you pat each other on the back. And like something about that is very like healing. But that's very different from anything we would imagine in psychotherapy. But I don't know that. So I've started really question, having worked a lot with men, and we're talking about dealing with emotions, not necessarily pathology. So when we come to pathology and mental illness, which there's a whole conversation about, but in that way, psychotherapy may be the most effective evidence-based approach. But I think that there are just some fundamental assumptions that we have in relation to, okay, why are men alexithymic? Well, there just may be like more to it. So for example, like if you tell a dude like, yeah, I got dumped. How do you feel, bro? It feels like I got kicked in the nuts. And we know what that means. So there's like physicality to the language. We can't articulate what the emotion is. We can't name it. We can't pick it out, but we are able to resonate with each other. So I think there's a lot more complexity to vulnerability and sort of what we share and what we don't share. I'm also not entirely sure. Like, I think it's healthy to share, but I'm not sure that men like need to share, to be blunt.
Okay.
So I kind of hear this from my wife where, you know, I'll catch up with a friend of mine, you know, like that I haven't seen in 4 or 5 years. And she's like, did you talk about their divorce? And I'm like, no, we didn't talk about the divorce. She's like, but you haven't seen him in so long. And like, he got divorced. Like, how could you? And I'm like, no, like we talked about video games because that's what we do.
Oh, that resonates with me so
you know, like we don't
much.
need to talk. Like, I know he's divorced. He knows he's divorced. You know, and then like the way that we connect and heal and the way that we bond is by like going back to a time that's happier. And like I'm done. And now being a fucking psychiatrist, I can analyze it and can say like, yeah, I'm like showing him that I still accept him, that nothing has changed. I don't think any less of him. That I still think he's a good human being, that I value him the same, that I'm going to be there for him in the way that I was 15 years ago. And this is the way that we do it. Right.
That makes a lot of sense. You brought up something that I kind of like want to ask more about. It's what did you call like the anger camp or something?
A ceremony.
The anger ceremony. Because one thing that I've not exactly like struggled with. I think struggle is the wrong word, but I've tried to be aware of is anger and kind of like the management of anger. And I know a lot of people may have issues like managing the anger to the point where, you know, get it under control. I don't even know if this is an issue. I just wanted to ask your insight about it because I don't know if I have like the opposite problem where I so very rarely do get angry, if that makes sense, to the point where sometimes I feel a little like maybe even like alien when, you know, something happens and people get angry and like sometimes I get asked, aren't you angry? Are you angry? And I'll be honest and be like, honestly, not really. And sometimes I feel like maybe maybe I should be more angry than I am, but sometimes it just like doesn't bother me, or at least I just don't get angry. And I don't know if that's a normal thing or if that's even a healthy thing. Maybe like a little anger is good. What do you think?
Have you always been not angry?
I've always very rarely gotten angry. I can't remember when, but I just didn't like the feeling of being angry. And I think my like I don't know if this is something that happened instantly or something that was like conditioned over time, but I just never liked the feeling of being angry, and I just like something in my brain was just like, you should not put your energy into like it's not the best to put your energy into that emotion because you don't get anything positive out of that. But I guess what I found now growing older is that I feel weird for sometimes maybe being like a bit too chill and not getting angry enough, even if I should. I'm not sure if a little bit of anger is healthy or not.
So it sounds like early on you concluded that anger was a bad thing to feel.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. I guess that's like just to me.
I'm
Or
sorry?
I guess just to me that being angry just wasn't a pleasant experience or a pleasant emotion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and how did you come to that conclusion?
Um, hmm. I think maybe some of the times where I got angry before, I never felt good afterwards. I guess I never felt good after being angry. Um, I think I'm not sure what happened or if this is like a culmination of different events, but this is gonna sound so weird, but I remember being in a league game once and 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 I remember being in a league game when I was like addicted to league at like one point in my life. And I remember the game just wasn't going well, and I just felt anger. And then I stopped playing the game, but like that anger just like didn't subside. And I'm just like, why am I feeling this? Why am I letting this get in the way of like everyday life? Um, and every time I felt that lingering anger, not like I use League, which, obviously a fucking meme, but even in like other aspects that have happened to me, I just hated the lingering anger and holding on to this lingering anger. So I kind of like maybe subconsciously kind of like averted the anger um, going forward more and more as I grew older.
Yeah, so is that a problem?
Is it a problem? Is like I like is it healthy to have a little bit of anger, to show a little bit of anger, or is this something I need to be aware of?
What do you
This
think?
logically, I think it might be healthy to kind of like show some anger, or I guess maybe not so much anger, but at least to release some anger.
Sure.
Um,
Like you said,
but
that's the. So I asked you what you think. You said logically, it sounds like
yeah,
it's good to show and feel some anger. What about
yeah, yeah.
what's the other part of your answer? What part of your answer is not logical?
Uh,
Does that make sense? You
Yeah,
understand my
yeah. So
question?
yeah, like
So
the reason I phrase it like that, like logically,
yeah,
I think
what is the
it's
other part of you
good.
think?
The other part of me is my heart, which tells me, I which tells me, man, I don't want to put in the effort of like I don't want to put in the effort to like deal with this. So that's like the two sides of me. And I don't know whether I should listen to my mind or whether I should listen to my heart.
When so then the way you're resolving that problem is by asking me,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so
Yes.
you're hoping that I'm going to give you an answer that'll solve your internal conflict.
Yeah. Hope maybe some insight or something like that.
Sure. So my first thing is that can I think for a second?
Sure.
It's a great question. Okay. So you're asking a theoretical question about anger, right? Should
Right.
I get in touch with my anger? Should I let myself feel it? it sounds
Yeah.
like there are negative consequences when you've been angry. The whole League of
Yeah.
Legends thing, it sounds like it hasn't served you well. You know,
Yeah.
I'd be curious whether your parents punished you for being angry when you were growing up.
I think they kind of instilled in me the kind of same philosophy, which is anger is bad. I think a
Okay.
lot of it comes down to that as well. Yeah.
Were either of your parents angry?
No, okay, actually, this is okay. Okay, now that we're talking about it, a lot of things are rushing back right now. So the reason I asked this, the real reason, is because even when someone does something wrongfully to me or my family, which has happened in the past, um, I remember like the emotional response wouldn't necessarily be anger. It would just be to kind of like shut down. At least I know that that was like that was my mum's default emotional reaction whenever something's happened to her in the past. And I think I saw that, and I saw how she handled it, and I think I've kind of maybe subconsciously internalized it, and it's kind of like affected me. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, except in the case where I do think maybe someone did wrong me or the people around me, and my first internal emotional reaction is not to get angry, but just to like analyze, I guess. And I don't know if that's a healthy thing to do.
Sure you do. You know.
Do I know?
Yeah. Is it a healthy thing to do?
I think it. Yeah. I genuinely I don't know, because it makes me feel like if someone did something bad to someone important to me, that I should feel like some kind of emotional anger and frustration towards it. Like maybe like a bit more, instead of just going into like taking a step back and just analyzing my feelings and stuff like that. Because I feel like that's part of being human. And yeah, I think feeling some emotions for the people that's important around you, whether that be positive or negative, is an important part of being a good person. I don't know. That's the best answer I have.
Yeah, so I think you think this is a problem.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like I could even ask, for example, like were there times in your life where someone did something to you and someone in your family should have been angry with them and they weren't?
Yeah. Most definitely, yes.
So like
Oh no, sorry, not to me, sorry. Someone did someone to my family, and my family, at least my mom, didn't get angry. She had a different emotional response, which was just kind of like shutting down.
and how do you feel about that?
I don't know. I feel like it wasn't a healthy way to deal with her emotions. And I've been trying to, I guess, like, I thought it was a normal thing until I saw how other people dealt with emotions, dealt with anger, especially. And I was like, maybe I'm the weird one. Maybe my parents were the weird ones, just because the only people who I'd seen deal with anger and situations like this was my parents. So it was only after growing up and seeing other people did I realize that maybe
A
it was
lot
a
of
little weird.
realizations and stuff. So I'm gonna go back. Okay, we're
Okay.
good, Garnt. We're gonna get there. Okay.
Okay.
So how did it? So someone in your family was wronged,
Yes.
and what
Yeah.
should your mom have done?
My mom should have, uh, I feel, cut that person out of their lives, or at least make sure that there was some kind of repercussions to what that person did.
Sure.
Um, and I do very much believe in forgiveness, but I believe that forgiveness has to be earned, and I don't believe like my mom is such a nice soul, such a kind soul, a forgiving soul, which is kind of like the reason why that I think she forgave this person, instead of just like trying to like revel in the anger. But to me, I kind of felt like maybe that person didn't do something to earn the forgiveness, and it was my mum, being the bigger person and looking over it. But I do feel like there should have been some kind of like even just emotional repercussions.
So how do you feel about that?
How do I feel?
What is the emotion that someone in this situation, that you watching your mom forgive this fucking person who didn't deserve it? And like,
I guess anger.
Holy shit.
I guess anger.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Here you are asking me, should I feel more anger? And it's like, it's right there. You just don't know what it looks like.
Oh, okay. Wow. I feel dumb now. Yeah, I guess I do hold some anger towards that, and I guess I didn't realize that up until this very moment.
Feeling dumb is anger too, by the way.
Okay.
Who are you angry with when you feel dumb?
I'm angry at myself.
There you go.
Right. But is frustration the same thing as anger, you think? Is it?
Sure.
Okay.
Frustration is anger, diet anger.
Okay.
It's a more, I imagine you're better at feeling frustrated than you are at feeling angry.
Yeah. I guess like when you asked me how I felt, it's like my first internal thought was frustration, and I was just like, I always like, I guess, painted that different as anger. Anger was like a much stronger emotion for me. If that
absolutely. So frustration is an umbrella emotion.
Yeah.
And even, and especially for men, anger can be an umbrella emotion as well, because for a lot of men, it's the only emotion that we're really allowed or conditioned to express. Like, oh, I'm going to get pissed. Like,
Right.
and then, like I'm a lot of anime questions too. Like, how do you feel watching these like anime stories of like vengeance and righteousness and like,
I'll be honest, I've never really gravitated towards those kinds of stories. I can appreciate it from like to me, there's like two different ways I view media, right? There's me viewing it as like critically, this is a very well constructed story and I can see the appeal. And then there's how I emotionally feel towards a piece of media, which is, there are some anime which I would not recommend to anyone, that I emotionally gravitate towards. I think subconsciously I gravitate to a lot of escapism. So there's this genre in anime. It's called isekai, and the entire point of this genre is that it's about a person who's been transported to another world, right? And I'm not sure if I've liked that idea. I always subconsciously gravitate to kind of like being in another world, enveloping the world of the author, and just something that's a bit detached from a story that's more grounded.
Do people who are in isekai anime, do they feel at home in their world?
A lot of the times, no. I'll be honest, isekai anime isn't that deep. This is purely like a surface level thing. A lot of modern isekai anime is about a guy who is normally a nerd or like is bullied, and then he goes to another world, and then he becomes a super ultra powerful person and gets all the girls and stuff like that. And to me, it's just like this is just like junk food to me.
Sounds like he's a misfit in one area and belongs in another area.
Wow, why you gotta do me like that, man?
Right?
Yeah. I mean, you're completely right. Yeah, you're now you say it like that. You are completely right. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's not like not all of the genre is revolving around that. I've always loved, whether being a misfit or not, just like enveloping like a world of fiction. I've
Sure.
always like even not just anime, but like video games as well. That's why like JRPGs is like my favorite genre, just because I can just, you know, not exactly be someone else, but just experience something that I wouldn't get to experience in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm being a slightly facetious here. I'm now curious if we did a study about, you know, because there are studies about video games and personality, and we know that certain kinds of personalities will gravitate towards certain kinds of video games. I'm so curious if you could do a study about what kind of anime people watch and like psychologically what their temperament is or what kind of internal conflicts they have. I'm curious about it. I'm sort of shooting the shit with you, and we can go back to the anger thing. But
oh no,
I think it's telling.
Yeah,
I do think that, and this is not that really scientifically radical, but you know, the media that resonates with us for a reason, right? It's because there's something in here that we see out there.
Yeah,
and we're colorblind in here, but we see it out there, and we're like, this is what I'm feeling. I can relate to this. This is like, you know, this misfit person, and now like they're going to this place and they're being this amazing human being, and you know, your parents pressured you to fucking be an engineer or whatever. And now you've transplanted, literally isekai'd yourself all the way over to fucking Japan, where you have an anime podcast, and you found your people, which are not normal people, by the way, right? Because the isekai world is like a magical world where the normal human beings like don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Your life is basically an isekai anime.
I'm gonna use that quote next time.
Right? I mean, misfit to society goes and carves out their place, making a job with a fucking the podcast called Trash Taste.
Oh fuck!
Well, how normie is that? Right? Not normie at all.
Yeah. Thank you very much for saying it. Now I get like the Dr. K pass. You know, the Dr. K stamp of approval. I can now use that quote in my life philosophy. That's perfect.
Yeah, but going back to the anger thing.
Right.
So, you know, I think there's a reason you bring it up, right?
Right.
And I think the reason that you bring it up is that I'm guessing that in your journey of self-improvement and self-reflection, you're noticing that there's kind of this blind spot.
Yeah.
That you're not feeling angry. That maybe you should be feeling a little bit more angry. And I get the sense you're conflicted, because the other thing is that there's a very logical part of you that's also like, feeling angry is bad, is useless. We shouldn't feel this way. It doesn't help us much. We didn't like the way that the anger used to linger with us. So there's like a lot of objective reasons why you don't want to be angry.
Yeah.
Then there's this whole other shit about your mom is a saint, and you're not allowed to be angry at a saint, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like what? I'm going to get pissed at someone for taking the high road and offering forgiveness. So there's even this angle of like, when you do feel anger, you kind of like don't give yourself license to do it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it.
And so I think there's a lot, and that's very common. So oftentimes when we suppress our anger, like I would guess that when you feel angry, you probably feel guilty with it. Which oftentimes, because we're like, why am I angry? I should be better than this. Yeah. There's a lot of shit going on there, which is really common with anger, by the way. So the first is that we learn early on that anger is damaging and doesn't help us. So we start to suppress it. The second is that sometimes when we feel angry, we feel guilty for it because we'll get angry at people who don't deserve anger. So then we'll suppress it even further. And then you'll make these logical arguments about how anger isn't helpful. There'll be some amount of conditioning, and then you end up with this blind spot of anger. Now, the reason it's a problem is because just because you're blind to it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And what we tend to see in people who are blind to their anger and don't allow it space is that it like pops up in other areas that are like confusing to other people. So, you know, I have no idea. I'm not saying this is the case, but if we were to ask your wife whether you sometimes get passive aggressive, right? Instead of just getting upset about something, you like make some fucking logical argument that is actually emotionally driven. And then it gets like very problematic because the real problem is not being vocalized or addressed because you you're not allowed to be upset because someone did something that was completely rational. But like, so then what the real challenge with anger is that if you don't really acknowledge it or notice it, it starts to pop up in other ways.
Yeah.
And then you try to fix those problems, but those aren't actually the problem.
Right.
The next thing is that if you don't really get in touch with your anger, sometimes people can take advantage of you and you'll become a little bit of a doormat, because anger is a emotion that is evolved to protect our territory. That's really what anger is about. Yeah. It's like when someone violates me, like the way that I coordinate my response is anger. So I'm going to cut off ties with them because I'm not going to let them violate me again. Going back to this stuff with your mom, super curious. We're not going to get into it, but if you want to talk to a therapist about it, interesting to explore. When she forgives someone, do they end up hurting additional people? And what's that going to do? That's going to make you even more pissed.
Right.
Right. And then you get stuck in this kind of thing where every time they forgive, they become more of a saint and you get more pissed. But then like, you're not allowed to be pissed at someone who's like such a saint.
Yeah.
I think you should get in touch with your anger for what it's worth, but do it in your own time and pace.
I mean, you said earlier, if you ask my wife, do I get passive aggressive? I'm not really a passive aggressive person. If something is bothering me, I kind of like I don't really have any problems just not really letting it out, but just having like, I would say more just like addressing it directly, if that makes sense. I don't really raise my voice. I don't really show the outwards emotions of anger, but I just talk. I guess the best way I would say is like the disappointed dad tone, kind of like talk, instead of outwardly showing anger or frustration. It's more of just like hey, this is really bothering me because you did this, or you did this to this person, basically. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think disappointed dad is a very common thing for anger to get transmuted into.
Right.
And okay. I think that, I mean, I'm not saying you should be pissed more, but I mean, you're asking, is it a problem? And I'm saying these are the problems that I tend to see.
I mean, I honestly ask not for like a yes or no answer. I believe sessions like this, I really value sessions like this, because I get to learn something about myself, and that's why I think therapy is like definitely important, even if you don't necessarily think you have anything that's wrong with you or anything like that. I think getting a better understanding of the person you are helps a lot, because it might be easy to think that you understand yourself, but even just today talking to you, I'm like, oh yeah, how did I've discovered things about myself that I think should have been fucking obvious.
Yeah, so that word fucking there is anger.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
so I don't think it's obvious, and it certainly isn't fucking obvious. It's actually really, really hard to get. But here you are, self-improvement Chad, and this is the one time you beat yourself up. Right? You can be like all for growth and self-reflection and looking back and growing and but this is the one place that you're judgmental towards yourself.
Right. Yeah.
How does it feel when I point it out?
When you point it out, this is, there's two things. One, I'm happy I've learned something about myself. Two, I'm frustrated that I didn't see this earlier.
Right.
But it was, it's not like again, it's like a very just light frustration. I'm just like, I'm just, like I said earlier, I'm just a dumbass.
Yeah, I think your experience of it is light, but I'm noticing actually like this is the most emotionally uncomfortable I've seen you over the last 2 hours. And even when I pointed out to you, it seems like you're still kind of beating, like, oh, there it happened again. And I missed it again. This is the vibe that I'm getting from you now.
I feel like moments like these, I mean, yes, I am, I guess, like emotionally uncomfortable. But I feel like it's moments like these that, help me learn and help me, I guess, help me learn and help me understand myself and help me give me more, not experience, Knowledge? No. Insight. Give me more insight about the person I am and the person that I want to be. So
Yeah, so I would encourage you to also experiment with being a little bit less positive.
okay.
Like in like you know, what I'm hearing is that you're making fucking lemonade right and left.
Right.
You know, and like it's okay to, I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's okay for you to be angry and for you to like not grow from it
Yeah.
and not become a better person.
Right.
Because it, you know, and on the flip side, it's like anger maybe for you is like, have you seen Naruto?
Yes, I have seen Naruto. Yes.
Like, so it's like Kyuubi no chakra. Right, so like that's what it is, and it's suppressed,
Right.
and it's trapped and whatever, and I think ultimately if you look at even things like flow states and stuff like that, your optimal performance actually comes from emotional activation. You need
Right.
emotional activation along with like the cognitive centers of your brain like working together to get into
Yeah.
your optimal mode of functioning. And even when it comes to some of this stuff like feeling disconnected from home and like, because I'm hearing that sometimes you feel disconnected. That's the most common thing
Yes.
that you've historically felt. I'm
Yes.
getting a sense that's getting, and I think that disconnection will continue as long as you're suppressing anger. So you
Okay.
can't, the brain, unfortunately, I mean, sort of, but when you kind of turn down the volume, you turn down the volume on everything.
Right.
And so I think going forward, getting in touch with your anger is probably a good thing. And I think you kind of realize that on some level. And the problem is that there's a lot of like logical crap there that's like floating around, which is not wrong. By all
Right.
means, improve and self-improve and stuff like that. But sometimes it's okay to just be pissed and nothing comes out of it. And it's
That
not
is-
good.
That is what my wife has been trying to teach me.
Okay, well, yeah, that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
and,
I mean,
so it's a journey.
yeah, it's a journey, and it means a lot coming from you as well. And yeah, this has been very enlightening, honestly, on a lot of different levels. I probably got to go in about
Yeah.
like 5-10 minutes because yeah, I'm
Let's-
at like my family's house right now.
Yeah, so I think it's a great place to stop if you're cool with it.
Yeah, yeah. I think if I bring up another topic, that's gonna turn into another half-hour conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm comfortable ending it here.
Yeah. So, any kind of last thoughts or comments, questions before we wrap up for today? Any like final reflections?
I just want to thank you. Thank you for doing what you're doing. I think you're doing something amazing here. And even if someone like me can learn a bit more about myself, I think it's something that is so invaluable. No, so valuable. Sorry. That's a very valuable experience.
Absolutely, man. And I really appreciate you coming on, sharing everything that you've shared about yourself. This stuff isn't possible without you. And it's been delightful to talk to someone who's had experience like sort of with so much self-reflection and kind of analyzing yourself. I hope I didn't bludgeon you too hard at the end, but
Oh,
you seem
no,
like
no,
an
no.
absolute beast mode kind of guy. And-
No. That's what I wanted. That's what I wanted.
And if you ever when you find that home of yours, I'd be happy to send you a home warming gift or visit one day or whatever. But
Thank you very much. Yeah. Whenever I find it or whenever I build it over time, as you were saying, maybe I won't find it immediately if it's built over time.
so one
Sorry.
last question I've got for you is like, do you have any anime recommendations? I haven't watched anime in a couple of years, so
For you, I would highly recommend Monster.
okay. I think that's the one about the detective.
Yeah, it's a detective who is chasing basically a serial killer, and it's one of my favorite anime or manga, and I think it's such an interesting character study on what it means to be evil. Are we born with it? Is it something we learn over time? And it has one of the best written and most interesting villains you can find in the medium. So
Okay,
yeah.
interesting. I will definitely check it out, dude. I'm hyped. Thanks
All
for the
right, that's
recommendation,
great.
man.
No worries, man. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on and enjoy your time with your family and looking forward to. You want to just tell us one last time where we can find you and what kind of work you do?
You can find me on my main anime channel, Giguck, or you can also catch me on the Trash Taste podcast. Just search either of them up on YouTube.
So awesome podcast, y'all. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Definitely check it out. And I will watch Monster and get back. It's done, right? That's the one thing.
It's done. It's done. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely check it out. So thank you so much.
Would you be interested in having any of the other boys come on? Because I can ask them.
Sure. We're happy to talk to basically anyone ever.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So we're just about having conversations with people about their experience of life. So sure.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. I'll shoot them a message then. Well,
as long as they bring recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Take care, Garn. Good luck with everything, man.
Thank you.